Of Constantinople, how a siege troubled Rome. What if I told you that the last breath of the Roman Empire wasn't a whisper in a dusty library, but a cannon blast that shook the world? Why did Western Europe, the so-called brothers in Christ, send barely enough help to fill a tavern? This isn't just a siege, it's betrayal, innovation, and desperation. So grab your armor, light your torches, and prepare to witness the fall of Constantinople, a story of walls, war, and one last stand that changed the world forever. Now let's dive in. The year is 1453, and the Byzantine Empire is like that one uncle who insists he's still in his prime despite the fact that his kingdom is basically a collection of walled vegetable patches. Once the glorious eastern half of the Roman Empire, Byzantium had been the torchbearer of imperial grandeur for nearly 1,500 years. But centuries of nonstop warfare, theological bickering, and a church split that made Thanksgiving dinners awkward for everyone had left the empire gasping for breath. Constantinople, the crown jewel of Christendom, was now more like a dusty tiara. Once home to 800,000 souls, it now housed a mere 50,000, most of whom were probably wondering why they hadn't moved to Venice yet. Let's talk defenses. Constantinople was the medieval version of Fort Knox, with a flair for drama. It had 12 miles of walls, 60-foot moats, and seawalls so thick they made Poseidon feel underdressed. And if you thought ships could sneak in through the Golden Horn, think again. There was a massive iron chain stretched across the water like a medieval "Do Not Disturb" sign. The city had survived multiple sieges, only falling once in 1204 when the Fourth Crusade got bored and decided to sack their fellow Christians instead. After that, the Byzantines went full DIY mode and reinforced everything. The result? A city so fortified it could be defended by a handful of grumpy monks and still hold off an army. Now meet Sultan Mehmed II, a 21-year-old with ambition, charisma, and the subtlety of a battering ram. He wanted Constantinople like a toddler wants candy, loudly, persistently, and with zero regard for adult supervision. Byzantine Emperor Constantine V tried diplomacy. He sent gifts, Mehmed sent them back. He sent diplomats. Mehmed sent them to the afterlife. Realizing that Mehmed wasn't here to make friends, Constantine turned to Western Europe for help. But alas, the East-West schism was still a thing. Constantine offered to reunite the churches, but the Pope's influence had waned, and Western Europe was too busy recovering from the 100 Years' War or arguing over who had the fanciest cathedral. The result? A few hundred volunteers, a couple dozen ships, and a collective shrug. Constantine scraped together 7,000 defenders. Mehmed brought 50,000 to 80,000 Ottomans, including elite janissaries, cavalry, and enough siege engineers to make Minecraft jealous. But the Byzantines had hope. Their walls were legendary, and they believed they could hold out until Mehmed got bored or ran out of snacks. Enter Orban, a Hungarian engineer with a flair for the dramatic. He first offered his services to the Byzantines, but they couldn't afford his fees, probably spent too much on incense and mosaics. So he went to Mehmed and promised to build a cannon that could blast the walls of Babylon itself. Mehmed, never one to turn down a good explosion, said, "Yes, please." Orban's cannon was 27 feet long, fired 600-pound stone balls, and could launch them over a mile. It took 3 hours to reload, overheated like a teenager's gaming laptop, and had a cannonball shortage that would make supply chain managers weep. Still, Mehmed was all in. He built a foundry 150 miles away, dragged the cannons to Constantinople, using 60 oxen each, and eventually had 70 bombards pounding the city like it owed him money. On April 2, 1453, Mehmed's army camped in front of the Theodosian walls, the only part of the city not surrounded by water. The siege began. For 3 months, the Ottomans bombarded the walls, dug tunnels, launched assaults, and tried every trick in the medieval playbook. Inside the city, Constantine V held firm. The defenders patched walls, repelled attacks, and prayed for reinforcements that never came. Outside, Mehmed's cannons roared, his troops surged, and Orban probably stood nearby whispering, "Told you so." Now pause for a sec. Step into the extraordinary. Subscribe to Eccentric Digital Pixel. Welcome to the wild frontier of creativity, where pixels pulse with imagination and every frame tells a story you've never seen before. We don't follow trends, we bend reality. Get exclusive access to jaw-dropping digital creations. Be the first to witness new drops by turning on notifications. Don't just scroll. Experience the pixel revolution. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a masterpiece. Because normal is boring, and you were born to see the world differently. The defenders of Constantinople had one thing going for them. Walls. Not just any walls. These were the Theodosian walls, the Beyoncé of medieval fortifications. Recently patched up after years of neglect, think medieval duct tape and divine hope, they stood tall and proud, ready to take on the wrath of Mehmed's artillery. The Byzantines had medium-sized cannons, which sounds impressive until you realize that firing them was like punching yourself in the face to scare off a bully. The recoil from these cannons could actually damage the very walls they were supposed to protect, so they were used sparingly, like that one cousin who only shows up at weddings to eat and leave. Instead of blowing holes in their own defenses, the Byzantines relied on bows, crossbows, and a few rudimentary firearms imported from the West. These early guns were about as reliable as a medieval weather forecast, but they made noise and occasionally hit something, which was enough to keep the Ottomans guessing. At sea, the Byzantines had 26 ships guarding the harbor. Mehmed had 126, which sounds like a slam dunk until you meet the giant iron chain stretched across the Golden Horn. This chain was Constantinople's version of "You shall not pass," and it worked beautifully. Any Ottoman ship that got too close to the walls was greeted with arrows, rocks, and the occasional boiling oil bath, medieval hospitality at its finest. On April 5th, Sultan Mehmed II arrived at his war camp, probably wearing his best siege day outfit. Across the battlefield, Emperor Constantine III stood on the walls with his men, the last Roman emperor staring down the future. Mehmed wasted no time. He sent his elite troops to mop up the remaining Byzantine strongholds outside the city. Within days, those forts were taken, and Mehmed's rear was secure, because even in medieval warfare, nobody likes surprises from behind. Then came the bombardment. Mehmed's super cannons hurled 600-pound stone balls at the walls. But here's the catch. They took 3 hours to reload, had the accuracy of a blindfolded squirrel, and were few in number. The defenders, ever resourceful, patched up the damage between shots like medieval handymen on overtime. Still, over weeks, the relentless pounding began to wear down even the mighty walls. The stones chipped, the cracks widened, and the defenders started to sweat, just a little. Meanwhile, Mehmed's fleet was stuck outside the harbor, staring at the chain like it owed them money. Their job? Make sure no Christian ships got in or out. But on April 20th, 4 Christian ships broke through the blockade after heavy fighting, sailing into the harbor like victorious underdogs in a sports movie. The defenders cheered, the Ottomans fumed, and Commander Süleyman Baltoglu was nearly executed for the failure. Only spared because his men swore he fought like a lion, albeit a lion who lost. Mehmed, ever the innovator, decided, if I can't go through the chain, I'll go around it. So he ordered his men to cut down every tree in sight, grease hundreds of logs, and build a road over the hills. Then, in one of the most absurdly brilliant moves in siege history, he had his men drag ships overland, up a hill and down the other side, and plop them back into the water, inside the harbor. Constantinople's defenders watched in horror as the laws of physics took a personal day off. Desperate, the Byzantines launched fire ships, floating bombs packed with oil meant to set the Ottoman fleet ablaze. But Mehmed had advance warning, and the attack failed spectacularly. The Christians retreated with heavy losses, and 40 Italian sailors were captured. Mehmed, never one for subtlety, ordered them to be impaled in full view of the city. It was a message, and it was not subtle. The Byzantines responded with their own brand of diplomacy. They executed 260 Ottoman prisoners on the city walls, one by one. The message? We can be petty too. But the real consequence was strategic. With Ottoman ships now inside the harbor, the defenders had to reposition troops to guard the sea walls, leaving the western walls, the main target of Mehmed's cannons, weakened. The stage was set. The walls were cracking. The defenders were stretched thin, and Mehmed was just getting warmed up. By late May 1453, the Ottoman camp outside Constantinople looked less like a war machine and more like a medieval meat grinder. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers had already perished in frontal assaults against the city's mighty walls, walls that had been battered, bruised, but not broken. Sultan Mehmed II, now visibly irritated and probably running low on patience and coffee, decided it was time to go under the problem. Mehmed ordered his engineers to dig tunnels beneath the city's walls, stuffing them with barrels of gunpowder like a medieval version of TNT. The plan? Blow the walls sky high and let the troops pour in like ants at a picnic. But Constantinople had its own ace, Johannes Grant, a German engineer with a name that sounds like he should be inventing steampunk gadgets. Grant had anticipated this move and countered with Byzantine counter-tunnels, which allowed defenders to flood the Ottoman tunnels with Greek fire, a substance so terrifying it made napalm look like scented candle wax. On May 23rd, 2 unlucky Turkish officers were captured and tortured until they spilled the beans. Every tunnel location was revealed. The Byzantines wasted no time. They destroyed the tunnels, snuffing out Mehmed's subterranean hopes like a bad idea in a boardroom. Inside Mehmed's war council, dissent was brewing. The siege was dragging on, casualties were mounting, and despite the flashy maneuver of dragging ships over hills, Constantinople still stood, mocking them with every sunrise. Whispers of Western reinforcements arriving to trap the Ottomans between the city and their own siege lines began to circulate. Mehmed, however, was not the quitting type. He was the burn the boats kind of guy, so he did what any determined young conqueror would do. He mobilized every remaining troop for one final, massive, all-or-nothing assault. Just after midnight, the attack began. The northwest walls, weakened by relentless cannon fire, were the target. These walls were older, thinner, and tired, like the last Jenga block before collapse. A Turkish force breached the wall, but the defenders launched a brutal counterattack, pushing them back with everything they had: swords, arrows, curses, and sheer desperation. But then, fate twisted the knife. The Genoese general, leading Constantine's foreign defenders, was seriously wounded and had to be evacuated. His troops, seeing their leader fall, panicked and retreated toward the harbor. That retreat was the death knell. The breach widened, the defense crumbled, and Constantinople's fate was sealed. Constantine V, the last Roman emperor, met his end in one of two ways, depending on which historian you ask. Some say he died fighting, sword in hand, refusing to abandon his city. Others claim he hung himself, overwhelmed by the inevitability of defeat. Either way, the Roman Empire, in all its ancient glory, died with him. Mehmed, now victorious, rewarded his troops with 3 days of unrestricted looting and violence. What followed was a nightmare. Thousands of women were raped. Every valuable item was stripped from homes, churches, and palaces. Murder ran rampant, and the city's sacred spaces were desecrated. After 3 days, Mehmed called an end to the chaos. He stood atop the ruins of a city that had once been the beacon of Christian civilization, and moved to tears reportedly said, "What a city we have given over to plunder and destruction." The Byzantine Empire, the last flickering flame of Rome, was extinguished. Constantinople became Istanbul, and Mehmed II became Mehmed the Conqueror. But the echoes of that final siege still ring through history, of walls that held, of empires that fell, and of a city that refused to go quietly. Next up, the Battle of Panipat, where empires collide and elephants charge. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another epic tale.